Mega Evolution is clearly cooler than Z-Moves and Gigantamax, and that's not just my opinion, that's Pokemon lore. And being serious, having appeared in more Pokemon titles than any other phenomenon, Mega Evolution's changed a lot from Pokemon X and Y through to ZA. You probably think that Mega Evolution was created as the result of the ultimate weapon 3,000 years ago, but as the lore keeps changing, as we keep learning more, you might find out that you're wrong. So many of you have expressed to me how much you love these longer lore deep dives, so I'm deciding to make this one a mega one. There is so much to thread together from Pokemon X and Y all the way through to ZA and now into the Mega dimension that I have gathered together for this video. And over 10 years of watching Pokemon theory videos, I got you covered with that too. At the end, we will look at all of the theories the community has come up with over this last decade and a bit, including an original by a new Pokemon theorist who's come up this year who I absolutely love, Amazed Dragon. So please stay tuned for his original theory later in this video. From humble beginnings to over 1 hour long lore deep dives, that is Mega Evolution. So, what do we know for sure? Well, Mega Evolution is a temporary form change that happens usually in battle, though there are some outside exceptions. We see this in Mega Latias and Latios as you're soaring over the Hoenn region, or in the rogue Mega Pokemon of Pokemon Legends ZA. Typically, though again not always, there are two ingredients to this alchemy of Mega Evolution. The first is a strong bond between the human trainer and their Pokemon, and the other is the possession of a Keystone and a Mega Stone. The resonating Mega Stone is relevant to the Pokemon trying to Mega Evolve. Mega Dragonitonite. And with the niche cases that I've mentioned where those things aren't the case, we'll get into them a little bit later on, but for now, let's just stick with what we know, generally speaking. Professor Sugimori is the leading scientist in the time of X and Y who heads up Mega Evolution research. And he has a belief that Mega Evolution and these Mega Stones are caused by irradiated regular evolution stones. That's a nice idea and makes a little bit of sense, but regular evolution and Mega Evolution are actually quite different. To understand Mega Evolution, I think we first need to take a look at evolution, and I think Sugimori's a bit biased here. Not only because he studied under Professor Rowan, the leading authority on Pokemon evolution generally. When a Pokemon gains a certain amount of experience through battling, or perhaps uses a particular move, is exposed to environmental conditions, or uses evolution items like these stones here, the Pokemon will begin to radiate with light. Then it changes form. From one species of Pokemon into another species of that same family. Let's take Charmander, for example. Charmander becomes Charmeleon, which becomes Charizard. When a Pokemon Mega evolves, it is not changing species. A Mega Charizard is still a Charizard, and the form change is not permanent. There are examples of de-evolution in Pokemon, but again, these are very niche cases, like the Shelder in the anime that comes off of the Slowbro's tail, turning it back into a Slowpoke, or an Eevee in the manga that can evolve in and out of its various evolution forms. Eevee is a great Pokemon to look at when it comes to evolution, because it is the evolution Pokemon. Its Pokédex entries say that its genetic code is irregular. It may mutate if it's exposed to radiation from elemental stones. Its genetic code is unstable, so it could evolve in a variety of ways. Its ability to evolve into many forms allows it to adapt smoothly and perfectly fit into any environment. This whole thing about genetic code and DNA, that does tie to Mega Evolution, for the symbol of Mega Evolution is the double helix associated with DNA. So it seems that evolution happens so that a Pokemon might adapt and survive. But the impermanence of the transformation? Well, that suggests that Mega Evolution isn't good for long-term survivability. Pokemon don't just survive because they're strong in battle. They survive because they can hunt prey, fly and outrun predators, swim fast, go far, and ultimately successfully reproduce and pass down their genes. It's not always the case that the strongest predator in an ecosystem is going to outcompete everything else. In fact, higher populations are usually reported in prey groups. The fact they come in higher populations means that their evolutionary strategy is different for passing on the genes not of themselves, but of the whole community. However, to compare to the real world for the moment, not every bee in the hive reproduces, only certain bees do. Others work to help pass along the genes of the hive. The species exists, but not everyone gets to reproduce, and that's a really important thing here. It might suggest why so few Pokemon do in fact Mega Evolve, because not every species needs Mega Evolution in its arsenal. Or perhaps not every species has been discovered. That's just me theorizing. I really need to have a conversation with Professor Rowan, because Professor Rowan suggests that 90% of all Pokemon species have a connection to evolution, and he's not wrong. He was wrong at the time when he said it in Generation 4, but now looking at our over 1,000 species of known Pokemon, he's actually only about 1% or 0.5% off. That is if you look at it like this. At the time of Pokemon Legends ZA, there is 1,025 known species of Pokemon. Of them, 212 do not evolve. But of that group, 113 are legendary and mythical Pokemon, Ultra Beasts and Paradox Pokemon. Pokemon sort of defined as a group largely by the fact that they don't evolve. They don't need to. It's not part of their evolutionary strategy, for the most part. I'm looking at you, Cosmog. But with stats so incredibly high, these kind of Pokemon almost represent what evolution is trying to achieve anyway. Mega evolutions are comparable to these legends, Ultra Beasts and Paradox Pokemon, leaving us with just 99 Pokemon, of which, as of recording this video, 9 known species actually do have access to Mega Evolution, leaving us with just 90 Pokemon. 90 individual species of Pokemon that, based on our current knowledge, don't have access to evolution, but again, that's changing all the time with every new generation of Pokemon that comes out. New evolution methods are being discovered, ancient DNA of Hisuian Pokemon is being found all across the world, well, in Hisui, but ancient Pokemon generally, and then there's baby Pokemon that seem to be being bred into existence by the people of the Pokemon world. Plus, you've got individual weird niche cases like the Unknown that might be tied to the cosmos of Pokemon, or Ditto that can change into any form. So does that have a connection to evolution? Maybe not. The point is, Professor Rowan is right. So it seems to be the case that for the 10%, the exception, they probably will have connections to evolution down the line. Eventually, one day. I mean, Pokemon will outlive us all. But even if not, for 90% of all Pokemon species, it seems to be fundamental to the DNA of what it means to be a Pokemon. It is far more common to be related to it than not. So, DNA, let's take a look at that. The double helix symbol is the symbol of Mega Evolution, the symbol that represents DNA. And as I mentioned earlier, when a Charizard Mega evolves, it doesn't become a new species like when a Charmander becomes a Charmeleon or Charmeleon is Charizard. Instead, it seems to divert into a new form of Charizard. It seems to draw something out of itself. The old Pokemon website described Mega Evolution as evolution that goes beyond evolution. Even their introduction in the XY games and certain Mega Evolutions coming in XY forms suggests a connection to DNA, with X and Y chromosomes being a part of the theming there. Zygarde is also, of course, tied to this with zygotes, cells. It's all about DNA. At the end of Pokemon Black and White 2, just before this, Colress's dialogue suggests that he's looking to try and find the latent power of Pokemon. And it is this energy, this life force of Pokemon that Sycamore said irradiated the evolution stones 3,000 years ago, when the ultimate weapon fired. So I think we now need to take a little bit of a look at that. So you probably know the broad strokes of the story. 3,000 years ago, there was a war in the Kalos region. We're not sure who with, but we know on at least one side it was AZ, the king of Kalos at this time, and speculatively his brother, as a result of some files we find in the Lysander labs. We believe the brother wanted the region for himself, so perhaps it was these two at the head of the conflict. AZ used a weapon, the ultimate weapon, built to revive his favorite Pokemon, his partner Floette, that was lost in battle. He built this machine using the life energy of Pokemon. Whether he obtained it from those Pokemon or whether he obtained it from Xerneas or Yveltal is actually a little bit unclear. However, in the opening cutscene of X and Y, depending on which version of the game you're playing, we do see it fueled by a different kind of aura, a different kind of light. He resurrected his friend Floette and then shot a blast into the sky that it pierced the stratosphere so intensely it ended the war. Wherever it landed, whatever it did, brought an end to the whole thing. In Pokemon Legends ZA, we learned that AZ built another machine, a machine that became the Lumiose Tower, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. AZ's brother survived and ultimately buried the weapon, with AZ taking the key to the weapon and traveling the land. In modern day, AZ's brother's descendant, that being Team Flare, and I say modern day in the time of X and Y, modern day ZA now. In the time of X and Y, Lysander attempts to use Xerneas and Yveltal's power to use the weapon once again. So it's very heavily implied that yes, it was Xerneas and Yveltal used 3,000 years ago. They are the Pokemon that represent life and destruction and the flow of energy in the Kalos region, brought to balance, of course, by Zygarde. This day 3,000 years ago as well is a date of very heavy speculation. I've done a number of videos about it and the timeline of Kalos and all of that, but 3,000 years ago, Meltan started disappearing from the world. There was the creation of the relic items around this time as well, and then also the Darkest Day. we have confirmation now that AZ was around during that time. So could it be connected? It's all just speculation at the moment. Speculatively, some people think that perhaps part of the beam, if not the entire thing, landed in Area Zero, the crater already existing dating back millions of years, but the phenomena of paradox Pokemon directly referencing Mega Evolution in Roaring Moon's Pokedex entries. In Pokemon X and Y though, Callum and Serena visit the Tower of Mastery, a place with a giant statue of a Mega Lucario. Gherkin is the elder, the shaman, if you like, of this area, and Gherkin imparts information that Lucario is said to be the first Pokemon seen to Mega Evolve, at least throughout Kalos. A trainer who had found a special stone and with a strong bond to the Lucario achieves Mega Evolution. And symbolically, it works so well that Lucario would be the first Pokemon to Mega Evolve, because Mega Lucario generally, is the Aura Pokemon. And Aura is frequently described as a sort of wave, an energy, a life force around all living beings. Just like the energy of life that is in all living beings that was used to fuel the ultimate weapon, but that is now used to fuel Mega Evolution. There is also the Anastar City Sundial, but I actually want to leave Pokemon X and Y for a moment because there's actually Mega Evolution lore earlier than X and Y. Mega Evolution first appeared in the Genesect Awakened movie, where a Mewtwo was able to, of its own accord, Mega Evolve. No connection to a trainer. Now, this might have something to do with Mewtwo's very special properties being sort of part human. That's a theory I'll get into a little bit later down the line. But it is interesting to note that when that movie came out, this was not Mega Mewtwo Y, this was just Mega Mewtwo. The idea of an XY or indeed a Z split wouldn't be something that would be introduced until much further down the line. And around the same time as all of that, there was the Pokemon Origin special. I love this special so much. And in this, we see Mega Evolution. Red Mega evolves his Charizard into Charizard X, using stones given to him by Fuji. Fuji, interestingly enough, being an ex-Team Rocket scientist, the same who created Mewtwo if you start crossing canons. A mini theory here, follow me, is that perhaps Fuji created these evolution stones, these Mega Evolution stones, through studying the manipulation of Pokemon DNA. It is interesting that at this time, it's only Charizard and Mewtwo that even have split evolutions. This is before Raichu came on the scene. But after that, we got a Mega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, changing the game and changing the lore that we knew about Mega Evolution. Or not changing it, not retconning anything, but just expanding on it. In ORAS, in the Sea Marvel, there are a number of documents reporting the activities of a company, the Greater Marvel Holdings. This company is like a shady organization in the background that were trying to use the life energy of Pokemon, it seems, and convert it into technologies, products of the day. The Devon Corporation uses this, and it's called Infinity Energy. That is the brand term for it. Lots of people think that Mega Evolution happens because a Pokemon channels into its Infinity Energy, but that's sort of Infinity Energy trademarked. It's the Greater Marvel Holdings and Devon Company that came up with that name. And the Devon Corporation uses this technology in so many different products, everything from fossil restoration to, speculatively, Pokeballs. Pokeballs are created by a few different organizations in the Pokemon world, produced by Devon Corporation, Silph Co., and the Pokeball Factory in Kalos. We learned from Karina that the Pokeball Factory now mass produces Pokeballs, but in the old days of ancient Hisui, well, they had to be handcrafted. In those days, Pokeballs were made of apricorns and tumblestones, special ore that was found all across the Hisui region. And it reminds me a little bit of Sir Aaron Starr from the anime. So, theory time here. I think Pokeballs use Infinity Energy in their production, and companies like Devon have just worked out how to mass produce them. All of this is really no different to what AZ did with the Ultimate Weapon 3,000 years ago. They've just branded it, that's all. Also in these games, we meet someone who's a little bit of a Lorekeeper fangirl, that being Zinnia, of course. We learn from her that thousands of years ago, in a primal age, Groudon and Kyogre tapped into that primal energy that overflowed in the world. They caused chaos for the Draconid people and fought one another. That was until a wish was made, a wish upon Rayquaza, a guardian spirit that actually didn't Mega Evolve in its first appearance, according to Zinnia. I make the caveat here because new information in ZA's Mega Dimension maybe contradicts this, but as far as Zinnia, the Lorekeeper, tells it, it was 1,000 years ago, when Subittles City was destroyed, that the people had a wish, a memory from 1,000 years before. They wished that the legendary Pokemon clad in emerald light would appear again, and that at this point the huge meteorite that lay at the heart of Subittles gave off boundless brilliance, and it's this brilliance that resembled a powerful keystone. Once again, Rayquaza descended from the heavens where it once was, and it was as a response to humanity's wish that it finally mega evolved. The connection here might be that there's a strong bond between the person making the wish and the Pokemon holding the stone. Where is this Pokemon stone? Well, it's called the Mikado organ. It's part of Rayquaza's DNA. And that might seem a little bit odd, like why does Rayquaza get this special Mega Evolution? But perhaps it doesn't. Perhaps it's just the case that Rayquaza's Mega Stone is not being held physically or as an item on it, but rather is just something it swallowed at some point. See, we know that Rayquaza loves to eat meteorites. Whenever the meteorite gem that's the core of Deoxys falls down to Earth, it's ready to attack and defend the region. The whole region is known for meteorite showers. I mean, just look at Meteor Falls or even Subittles, which was created by a giant meteorite. We also know, according to the Pokedex, that it eats Minior, sorry buddy, and evolution stones. Evolution stones are thought to come from meteorites, and when the ultimate weapon fired, it fired into the sky beyond the ozone layer. So perhaps in eating an irradiated evolution stone, Rayquaza gained a new organ somewhere within it. Perhaps it was Rayquaza itself that was irradiated with meteorites still in its digestive tract, meaning that Mega Evolution is kind of part of it now. Perhaps it actually is the first Pokemon to Mega Evolve. As I said earlier, this happened around 1,000 years before the main stories of Pokemon, and there are NPCs across Lumio City who all believe that Mega Evolution started in the Hoenn region, so it would make sense, and this is what Zinnia believes too. Now back to the Kalos region, because I want to talk about Anastar City and that sundial. According to the map description, the sundial is thought to have perhaps come from space. Perhaps it was a meteorite, and it's very clearly connected to Mega Evolution, more so actually in the anime, where it's the kind of main object of attack for Lysander and the XYZ arc of the show. But in the games too, in the Hour of Twilight, interacting with this stone will upgrade your Mega Ring, allowing you to see Mega Stones wherever they are across the land, just like little fallen meteorites, wishing stars found on the ground. And perhaps the whole town was built around the falling of a meteorite, not too dissimilar to Subittles, except in this case that meteorite was the sundial. Perhaps that beam from the ultimate weapon 3,000 years ago hit more than a few objects in the night sky, or irradiated them, or brought them into creation, crystallized pure energy. It's interesting to note that the Anastar City sundial looks just like the Pokemon Diancie. It's the same crystal, and as of the time of recording this, Diancie is the only legendary Pokemon that is able to Mega Evolve. Heck, in the time of X and Y, it was the only Kalos Pokemon that could Mega Evolve. I don't think that's accidental. Of course, there are now a few more of those, as we find in Pokemon Legends ZA, and just like the Anastar City sundial, there is an odd growth of crystallized Mega Power. That's what AZ calls it. They are found across the city, and they contain Mega Shards when smashed by Pokemon, and seem to fuel a Pokemon's ability to Mega Evolve. I do wonder if they are the same material and substance as both Diancie and the Sundial, but I'll come back to this shortly. In the animated series, as I mentioned earlier, Lysander's plan was actually to emulate something similar to the ultimate weapon firing, but not by using the ultimate weapon, but instead by sending the Megalith, a stone very similar to the Anastar City Sundial that has the same kinds of properties when it comes to Mega Evolution. It's kind of like a giant Mega Evolution stone, one that Groudon and Kyogre fought over in the Primal Age and even in modern day. He wants to get that stone, and he kind of corrupts it and transforms it into this dark Zygarde. And his plan is to send this false Zygarde into the sundial, causing something much like that day in the war 3,000 years ago. We actually learn in Pokemon Legends ZA that Lysander had plans for the other device, the one that AZ built 2,000 years prior to the events of the current games and 1,000 years after the firing of the first ultimate weapon. In the games, we learn that this tower, this device, is called Ange, I guess short for Angel. It's hidden inside the first Prism Tower that's now been built over, and we witness that it is a sort of source of light. Makes sense for a tower called Prism Tower. At this time, 1,000 years after the firing of the ultimate weapon, he was approached by a man of great power who wanted to protect the Kalos region, and he was asked to build something similar to the ultimate weapon. So he built Ange to bring some meaning to Floette's life. It's not quite clear what this means, but given the passing of AZ later in the game, the day after the tower goes berserk, I do wonder if perhaps this tower was supposed to redistribute the eternal life energy within himself. In the same way, of course, that the original tower was powered by Xerneas and Yveltal, this one may be powered by him or his Floette. The wording is ambiguous, but to give meaning to the eternal life of Floette might be to give it an end, for without an end, many stories don't have a meaning. However, it was a time of peace, and eventually the first prison tower was built over by the one that we see in Pokemon X and Y, and then again the one that's being, I guess, redeveloped by Quasartico in ZA, before ultimately that rogue mega power from underneath it unleashes. In the games, we learn from Lysander and his research into the ultimate weapon that the way the weapon works is by taking the life energy of people and Pokemon and distilling this energy into its purest form. This is going to be really important for theories later on. After that, the energy can be turned into conduction, emission, or radiation. To conduct the energy is to do what happened to the Floette, to conduct the energy into a being that, like AZ, or perhaps even like Lysander now, they may live for an incredibly long time, or perhaps eternally. Radiation then suggests something a little bit more similar to what's happening throughout the game, the rogue mega evolutions. The energy emits slowly over time, and the accruing of this emission turns into these stones that appear all over the place, until eventually rogue mega evolution happens, and the emission then would be the firing of the weapon. But Lysander confesses that he wanted to use both towers, they just didn't have a way to activate the prison tower, so focused on the ultimate weapon. So perhaps the implication is that he wanted to not only use the ultimate weapon to wipe out all of those that weren't part of his beautiful Team Flare, but also to imbue eternal life into all of those that were part of his organization. He would become a god, and they would become his angel. However, between X and Y and ZA, there is the events of Sun and Moon, where we get even more lore. Dexio and Cena show up once the aides of the Professor Sycamore, they bring the Mega Ring, or the Mega Evolution part of the bracelet, to the player, who already has a Z Ring. They note there's a sort of similarity between the two phenomenons, and now that we have the Omni Ring coming in Pokemon Champions, it's clear that all of the phenomena of the Pokemon world, including Gigantamax and Terastal, they're all connected. In this context, Z-moves are also created as a result of kind of shards of, I guess, crystal that come from space that are thought to be related to meteorites. And in order to achieve the Z-move with the Pokemon, there needs to be a strong bond between the Pokemon and the human trainer. On top of all of that, these crystals are said to be parts of Necrozma, and when you look to Necrozma and the shiny form of Minior, there is clearly a relationship there, so more on that again in the theory section. We also know that Mega Zygarde's new move is called Nihil Light. Mega Zygarde glows, and there is a comment from Lysander later in the game that suggests that the Z moves seen in Alola are very similar to this new Mew move by Zygarde. Zygarde didn't have a Z move, but it did have Core Enforcer, a move that drew a giant Z in the round. This is the move that becomes Annihilate. And Annihilate itself? Well, the name is Nihil, as in Nile and none, and light, Nihilite, but also Annihilate. The Japanese name of this move is the light that returns to nothing, suggesting that the reason Zygarde was in Alola was to learn the ways of the Z move. It also suggests that Necrozma is very tied to Zygarde. The tower is the Prism Tower after all, and Necrozma is the Prism Pokemon, a light absorber that then becomes the Ultra Necrozma. Combine this and the shiny Minior looking a lot like Necrozma's design, and the fact that Minior is the main snack of Rayquaza, the first Pokemon to Mega Evolve, and you can see how well fleshed out the world building is becoming. We'll come back to all of this in the theory section, but there is a dark twist on this Mega lore. Many of the Pokedex entries introduced in Sun and Moon or Sun and Moon are less favorable towards the phenomena of Mega Evolution. Mega Evolution is described as painful for the Pokemon going through the process, warping their biology beyond what is comfortable for them. The Pokemon, I guess, a huge overflowing of energy, sometimes making the Pokemon rageful and angry. We actually see something like this in the Volcanion movie, where the character of Ulva uses a Mega Staff and a technology called Mega Wave to evolve, or Mega Evolve, many Pokemon at the same time, Pokemon he doesn't have a strong bond with. Karina, as the successor to the Tower of Mastery and all there is to know about Mega Evolution, says that Mega Evolution is a kind of magic between Trainer and Pokemon Keystone and Megastone. But rogue Mega Evolution makes her angry. It's a cruel joke that goes against everything that Mega Evolution is about. This seems to be a wrong way to achieve Mega Evolution, and this connection to waves is, again, very similar to Aura, which is described as waves around a Pokemon. So you can see how it's all the same kind of stuff. Speaking of the same kind of stuff, that movie is set in the Azoth Kingdom. Project Azoth in the games is what Team Aqua and Magma are trying to do in restoring Groudon and Kyogre to their primal states. In those games, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, the Omega and Alpha are references, of course, to the Greek letters that represent the beginning and the end. Azoth also as a word, as a concept in the real world, represents the beginning and the end, and AZ literally is the beginning and end of the alphabet. And then at the heart of all of this, you've got Zygarde, a giant green snake, at least partly inspired by the Ouroboros, a snake that eats its own tail. Also Nidhogg, the serpent that nibbles at the roots of the world tree, and then Jormungandr, the world serpent of Norse mythology, that will be there at the time of Ragnarok. When all the divine beings clash, the most powerful beings, Mega Evolution, legendary Pokemon, Primal Reversion, on the day that they all clash, the day of reckoning, the Apocalypse Day 3,000 years ago, the day that Lysander is trying to begin about. It represents the idea that the end is the beginning, and the beginning is the end, and that's what we're seeing in Pokemon Legends ZA. That's all symbolic, but speaking of Legends ZA, of course there's a lot more lore there, but before we get into that, there are a few little bridging bits of lore that show up throughout the franchise. Let's take Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Mega Evolution is still in that game, though ultimately not hugely, delved into. Though it is the character of Blue who gives you access to Mega Evolution, and that's interesting because Blue is referenced in Pokemon X and Y as coming to the region. So perhaps his time in the Kalos region was studying Mega Evolution. Either that, or maybe he was looking for the lost tome of the Parfum Palace, that is a tome on how to resurrect long-lost Pokemon, using the life essence of other Pokemon. Maybe one day Blue will create his own ultimate weapon to finally resurrect that Raticate. And while most Megastones are purchased, Green shows up giving you Mewtwo's Megastones in Cerulean Cave. Again, there's not a lot of lore here, it's just a reminder that Mega Evolution still exists out there in the Pokemon world. Pokemon Unite, Go, and the animated series continue to have Mega Evolution functioning throughout them. In Pokemon Masters EX, what's really interesting is we get loads of characters that will never have had access to Mega Evolution in the games, finally getting it, like, for example, Bugsy and Bugsy's Beedrill getting Mega Evolution. I think this is really cool. I hope we see more of this kind of thing. And while Mega Evolution isn't really referenced again in the main series for Sword and Shield, come Scarlet and Violet, starting to get those mentions again, of course in Area Zero, and with that information about Roaring Moon. But of course we also have the lore of ZA, which I've scattered throughout the video, but there is something else. The lore in ZA isn't massively new, it mostly consolidates what we already knew, but I mentioned those pink shards. You're able to sell them to Quasartico to help in their development of the research of new Mega Stones. In fact, a number of NPCs allude to this fact, and the rival directly comments that Mega Dragonite is a newly discovered Mega Evolution, suggesting that perhaps some Mega Pokemon have been engineered into existence, given the relationship to DNA. This wouldn't be surprising at all. In fact, such a thing is confirmed when Jet, the CEO of Quasartico, shows you the Magearna she found in Lumio City during the redevelopment plan. She mentions that she'd like to create a Mega Stone for it, and she needs 999 Mega Shards from you to make it happen. Meanwhile, other Mega Stones seem to happen organically, much like the irradiation of Evolution Stones that Sycamore mentioned. We see the transformation of the pebble that Zygarde gives you into Zygardenite. It is unclear whether this is just some ordinary pebble, or perhaps Evolution Stone that's becoming irradiated, or perhaps even part of a meteorite. There is some suggestion that even regular Evolution Stones do come from meteorites. But the new lore here simply suggests that Mega Stones can both be organic and natural, and developed through science. Some of the best lore actually comes from Quest 104, a simple quest that involves you battling some bug Pokemon. The user here Mega Evolves her Pinsir and says that she's really glad that she gets to Mega Evolve her Pokemon, but there are shady rumors about AZ working with Quasartico. She says she's heard rumors, though confesses they are just rumors, that some shady character taught Quasartico how to make Mega Rings. Apparently this person is AZ, and the story goes that AZ traveled all the way to some far-off region called Hoenn. There he researched the origins of Mega Evolution to satisfy his own curiosity, but shared his research with Quasartico. What does he hope to achieve? Oh well, she doesn't mind, and neither do we, as we get to enjoy all these brand new Mega Evolutions. However, how can we know that what we've learned here is actually true? For within the Mega Dimension DLC, we actually get a different interpretation of what exactly happened in the Hoenn region those thousands of years ago. You see, Ansha tells us of the history of Mega Evolution and the Draconids in the form of a children's storybook, one that she was read many times by Diantha. Many times, so she must have soaked in those details. But were the details correct? For in this tale, we learn of the Draconid people in a primal age, when the energy overflowed in the world. We learn of the clashes of Groudon and Kyogre, and then Rayquaza appearing, and thanks to a wish from the people, it Mega Evolves into Mega Rayquaza, quelling the fight. But between 2 pages of this book, We've jumped 1,000 years. The Primal Age is told to us by Zinnia to have been a time when the primal energy flowed naturally and was thousands of years ago. Zinnia tells us that Rayquaza's first Mega Evolution happened just 1 millennia ago based on a wish, a memory of the people from 1,000 years earlier. But what's going on here? Is this a retcon by the game creators? Does the multiverse explain it perhaps? Or maybe there's a way that you can theorize and reconcile the contradictions in these two stories. For me, I think these are two stories being told by two different types of lawkeepers. One is the lawkeeper, a role held deeply within the traditions of the Draconid people, and the other is a story being told from a mum to a kid. This is how the myths and legends of even our world works. There are unreliable narrators, and seeing different perspectives of the same events being told different ways brings me a lot of joy, because it means there's so much more mystery in the world of Pokemon, and so much more that we can just never know. Before we jump into the theories though, I do want to just look at a couple of select Mega Evolutions, because some of them have really interesting lore. Charizard, Mewtwo, and Raichu are the only Pokemon with XY Mega Evolution split, but there are also regular and then Z splits, far more powerful and aggressive Pokemon that use up more Mega energy. This of course includes Lucario and Absol. The nature of these splits though are entirely unclear, and maybe the stuff of theorizing. According to the Pokedex entries for Mega Aerodactyl, part of its body has become stone. Some scholars claim this is Aerodactyl's true appearance. This is really interesting because most people believe the rock typing of fossil Pokemon comes from the fact they are restored from fossils. But that's not strictly true, as the fossils of the Galar region have shown us, though they are odd exceptions. But on top of all of that, rock Pokemon probably also existed in ancient times, so it may be that Aerodactyl's true appearance and true typing is flying and rock. I think there's an interesting subtext here about Mega Ampharos. The person who gives you Ampharosites is overlooking the Azure Bay, and another trainer overlooking the waters of Cormorant City, just to the south, mentioned that when he was younger, he saw a Pokemon trainer with a great Ampharos, perhaps suggesting some kind of battle in recent history. The Azure Bay is home to the Sea Spirit's Den, a place where there was once a great outpouring of energy, and the name Den certainly reminds me of the Max Raid dens that appear just across the Pokemon version of the English Channel in the Galar region. It's definitely wonderful plot points for some kind of Mega Ampharos theory. Slowbro has a Pokedex entry that's fascinating. All the energy from Mega Evolution poured into the Shelder on its tail, leaving Slowpoke to be swallowed whole. What's really interesting about this is that Shelder shouldn't be able to Mega Evolve, because it's a pre-evolution. Surely this would be a Mega Cloyster, no? So either the Pokedex entry is wrong, or it's giving us insight into something very interesting here. I can't do this video and not mention the Battle Bond Greninja. For many years, people thought, well, this is just another form of Mega Evolution, but we now know for a fact that Mega Evolution happens to Greninja, and there is a Mega Greninja in Pokemon Legends EA. So Battle Bond is a totally different phenomenon, and it makes sense. It doesn't need a keystone to happen, and it's character specific, or you'd think. However, there is actually an episode of the anime, The Ninja Hero, where we see a Battle Bond Greninja in the ancient past. This is easily resolved though by just some Ash Ketchum time travel shenanigans. He's not a stranger to it. Or, of course, we could ask the question, the age-old, who is Ash Ketchum's father? Or in this case, great-great-great-great-grandfather. Because there are a lot of people out there who look quite a lot like Ash Ketchum. I suspect he's got more than a few relatives running around. Of course, maybe the Ash Greninja is Mega Greninja Z now, so the question's back on the table. I'd love to go into more detail about Diancie here, but to be honest, it's its own video and I've already done it, so you might want to check that one out after you're done. Oh, and if you're this far into a video about the lore of Mega Evolution, a deep dive like this, then you are clearly in the right place for you. I love exploring the world of Pokemon lore. Do me a favor and find that subscribe button, because when we hit 300,000 subscribers, which is coming up soon, I got something special planned. There's also Mega Malamar. Malamar got a Pokedex entry in Pokemon Sword and Shield's DLC, suggesting that some historical event was altered by Malamar's hypnotic powers. And sure enough, in the lead up to ZA, we see a whole trailer about just that with Malamar, suggesting that Mega Malamar really did exist in the ancient past. I also have to draw attention to Mega Glamora. The Pokemon is the ultimate weapon upside down. It's a Pokemon found in the depths of Area Zero usually, though it appears in all sorts of places where there is terrestrial energy. And here's the thing, another Pokemon found in the depths of Area Zero is Carping, and in the Diancie video that I mentioned, well, there are a bunch of connections between Glamora, Terrapagos, terrestrial energy, and Mega Evolution, and this is just another. I'm sure I'll have a theory on this soon, and make sure you're subscribed to not miss that. Well, this is one of those moments where actually if you have a theory on this, I would love to hear it in the comments down below.
Mega Dragonite 2 is very, very interesting because it takes a more angelic-like appearance, and Dragonair got a new Pokedex entry in Scarlet and Violet suggesting it's called the Divine Pokemon. This suggests that much like the Roaring Moon Pokedex entry, the people of Scarlet and Violet do know about Mega Dragonite.
We also, of course, have Mega Zygarde. It's unknown whether Zygarde's always been able to Mega Evolve and we've just never had the stone before, or perhaps this is the very first transformation of the Pokemon. What we do know is that Zygarde was briefly in Alola, and now it seems to irradiate itself in a sort of glowing light. It even looks a little bit more alien-esque in its design, like a visitor from another world. Of course, we get that comment that its attack is kind of like a Z move, and certainly it is. Its main new move, Nihilite, is so well named. Clearly, this Pokemon has undergone some kind of a transformation in recent years, suggesting that this Zygarde is brand new to its own canon. Mega Zygarde did not exist in the ancient past, or if it did, it certainly had to revisit Alola to relearn the techniques. Well, here now it can for the first time Mega Evolve. And we're not even done, because that light that returns to nothing, well, I suspect it went somewhere, the Pokemon Dream World, where Darkrai is residing for reasons to do with the plot of Pokemon Legends EA's Mega Dimension DLC above Lumiose Tower. All you need to know is that Darkrai's lovely little nap got interrupted by some very bright fireworks going off, and as a result, it became imbued with Mega Evolution energy. Now, new readings that, according to Kobo, are different to that from Mega Power start arising all across the city, and the events of the Mega Dimension DLC take place. In that DLC, there is a brand new bit of Mega Evolution lore that I think is unbelievable. A bunch of the Mega Evolution users, our main characters, position themselves around the ruins of Ange, and there they channel their keystone power into a donut. A donut? A donut. Some kind of a donut, I guess. Is this a Mega Stone? What are they doing? Transforming it into some kind of Mega Donut? Well, actually, possibly. You see, this donut is not just made up of the berries of the Pokemon world, but also a special spice, an ingredient made by the Rust Syndicate. And the Rust Syndicate are the only other organization in the Pokemon world, other than Quasartico, that collects Mega Shards. Is it possible that this spice is the result of ground up bits of Mega Shard? It sounds ludicrous, and I'm sure you can find a hole in here somewhere, but it's just like the water that comes from the crystal pool powering up the Mochi that allows the Loyal 3 to become their new forms, or the Herba Mystica that allows the Titans to transform. And with so much lore across the entire Pokemon franchise, it's no wonder that there is so much to work with when it comes to Pokemon theories. The community has come up with loads over the years. I mean, so many. There are even new ones coming out today, like the original theory on Mega Evolution by a Maze Dragon that you'll be hearing shortly, because this is not just a compilation of the most well-known theories about Mega Evolution. This is a compilation of all the deep lore. By the end of this video, you will be a Mega Evolution expert. Given that Mega Evolution is such a beloved topic, there are so many theories that you've all come up with over the years, and I say you all, I gotta admit, I'm responsible for more than a few of them, but right now I have at least 20 different Mega Evolution theories, and in the comments, if I've missed any, you'll have to let me know. A big part of the reason for there being so many is there are so many Mega Evolutions, each of them with their own interesting bits of lore, and reasons that they might have Mega Evolved as they did. And let's be real, having a Mega Evolution is probably the most interesting thing about a Barbaracle, so I can't imagine myself doing a lore of Barbaracle video anytime soon. So if it has a theory, I'll cover it here. It doesn't. Or maybe it does, and you'll let me know in the comments below, because original theories are coming up all the time, like the brand new original theory that I mentioned that a Maze Dragon has come up with. That's coming in just a moment. But first, let's touch base with theory number 1, a classic by my good friend Lumi that Mega Evolution pulls from specifically ancient Pokemon DNA. So I've touched on this a lot already, the idea that Mega Evolution is pulling from DNA, well, that makes sense. Dormant genes that are no longer in use, but ancient DNA specifically, the DNA that the Pokemon used to exhibit in the ancient past. There's a couple of points of reference for this. First of all, you've got Mega Aerodactyl's Pokedex entry that says that it kind of pulls from the dormant genes of Aerodactyl to give it the rock-like appearance that it used to have in ancient times. This is a little odd, given that we know that fossil Pokemon in particular seem to usually be rock-type because they've been revived from fossils. But still, it's very possible that it was a rock type in the ancient past. Then, of course, there's Paradox Salamence, or should I say, Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon found in the depths of Area Zeros. Look, it's from an alternate dimension, but it is from the past of that alternate dimension, or an alternate dimension in which Pokemon look a lot more like they did in the ancient past. Even so, it clearly references Mega Salamance's design, and so the idea is that, yeah, it's pulling from ancient Salamence DNA. Mega Mewtwo? Well, it's pulling from Mew's DNA. And heck, let's just take a look at Mega Steelix. You know where this is going if you've watched this channel for a long time. I love the Crystal Onyx. It first appeared in the anime and then never ever appeared again. How come? Well, maybe it's because it's a rare, ancient version of Onyx that just doesn't really exist anymore, with a diamond-like body. We know that Onyx ingests mud and dirt underground, and in ingesting metals, it becomes harder than diamond, evolving into Steelix with a metal coat. But when it mega evolves, it pulls from something within itself. Perhaps the DNA is not the DNA of all Onyx, but DNA of what Onyx used to look like in the ancient past. Some ancient regional Onyx that, unfortunately, we've yet to see in game. Please, soon, Game Freak, please. There are some Mega Evolutions that don't quite line up with this, but maybe their stories are more specific. Mega Rayquaza, for example, represents how Rayquaza transformed 1,000 years ago, but 2,000 years earlier, it was still able to stop Groudon and Kyogre in their primal state without Mega evolving. Speaking of Groudon and Kyogre, they are primal reversions, so it is a little bit different, but playing on the same kind of energy. They are, unlike drawing from their DNA upwards into modern day to create something new, they are actually primally reverting back to how they looked in the primal age. So it's not the exact same thing, but perhaps draws from that ancestral DNA. Then there's the Eternal Flower Floette that has Pokedex entries mentioning the fact that it's not the Floette itself that seems to ingest the Mega Evolution energy. This moves us nicely on to Amaze Dragon's original theory.
Hello everyone. Have you ever noticed something strange about the name Hyper Rogue Ange Floette? Not the physical characteristics, no. I mean the name itself. Why? Well, Floette doesn't actually have any real connection to this new Pokemon here, which we know because during the final battle, your rival calls out to you to let you know that Mega Floette is actually protecting her from within. So this flower on top here, that isn't Floette. That's the flower having gained a sentient form. This is further backed up by Mega Floette's Dex entry, where it tells us that it's the flower that Mega evolves, not Floette. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's take a quick step back. What even is Ange? In simple terms, it's the tower that AZ built 2,000 years ago with the goal of giving the citizens of Lumiose City eternal life. However, this backfired severely, and instead it's currently spreading Mega power throughout the streets, flooding it with not only crystals but also rogue Mega Pokemon. This energy, as Toby has spoken about before, is likely similar to Z-Power, the kind that came from Necrozma, whose powers affect living things and nature in various ways. This power was actually utilized by Zygarde in some way during its Mega Evolution, specifically during the time it uses Nihil Light, a move extremely similar to Necrozma's Light that burns the sky. But why? Well, as stated by L, Zygarde went to Alola to pursue this power in order to recover from the weapon firing 5 years ago. However, there's something that irked me about that statement. Why did Zygarde go to Alola rather than the Hoenn region? A land that's filled with primal energy that Groudon and Kyogre fight over constantly. It's because the energy that Zygarde sought, the one it needed to Mega Evolve, was more closely in tune with Z-Power, rather than the raw primal energy of the Earth. The similarities between the two phenomena don't just end there. Just like Mega Evolution, Z-moves can only be used by a trainer with a crystal and a strong bond with their Pokemon. Which brings us to only one conclusion. This energy is the same, something that I will call light energy for now, and based on the evidence provided here, I think it's also the same energy that Pokemon both use to evolve and that Arceus itself wields. It's also the same energy that AZ used to fire the blinding light from the ultimate weapon, something that the Devon Corporation later took inspiration from and dubbed Infinity Energy. Now then, let's go back to the topic we discussed earlier, the one about Mega Evolution seemingly creating new Pokemon in the form of Hyper Rogue Ange Floette, for example. The concept of light being able to create new life is pretty widespread in the Pokemon world already. I mean, take a look at Claydoll's Pokedex entry, an ancient clay figurine that came to life as a Pokemon from exposure to a mysterious ray of light. While we don't know where this light ray came from, we can infer it originated from a being that descended from the sky. Perhaps it was even Arceus. But that wasn't the only mention of light rays creating life. Take a look at Deoxys' Pokedex entry as well. The DNA of a space virus underwent a sudden mutation upon exposure to a laser beam and resulted in Deoxys. However, the most obvious example would be the totem Pokemon of Alola, as they are stated by the Ultra Recon Squad to literally have grown to these sizes due to the exposure to Necrozmas. Z power. With all of that in mind, I'd like you to think about the following. What would happen if this infinity energy building up inside Hyper Rogue Ange were to continue to increase? What would happen if these roots that bury their way through Lumio City's streets were to grow further and stretch out beyond the city's limits? What if Ange were to mutate even further? Well, then you'd get something else. You'd get a Pokemon that would have a root system spanning across the entire continent. You would get the world known to us as the Ultra Plant, a world where we failed to stop Ange's giant beam of light, the home dimension of circuitry. Circuitry's size ranges from small to gigantic, but they're all connected by a vast cable-like root system. The roots of this Pokemon are held together by what at first seems to be zip ties of a sort, an adaptation for the circuitry that aren't created with the shell of Lumio's tower that hold it all together. These cable-like ties also resemble fairy lights, a reference back to Floette, whom it was created for. This reference is also reinforced in Xurkitry's whimsical nature, a defining characteristic of many fairy-type Pokemon. But what's really interesting about the roots that we can see through this overhead shot of Lumio City is the fact that they all seem to be heading towards one general location, the route gate that leads to the Kalos power plant, which makes sense as the ultimate weapon also required the need of extreme amounts of electricity in order to fire 5 years ago. And thus, in the Ultra Plant, the world where we failed to stop Ange, it supposedly was able to grow itself towards this Kalos power plant, or even others, as this cannot just be the only one. We can even see a few more advanced designs for power plants within the Lumio's museum, so I don't think it's inaccurate to say that this root system spread itself to a ton of different power plants throughout the entire Kalos region. Another important factor is the way the circuitry in the Ultra Plant seem to consume energy from the ground itself, which both pulls back to their plant-like origin, but also to the fact that these roots must be expanding through every facet of the ground. Each circuitry would thus just need to connect itself to this gigantic network of cables in order to recharge. There are also the crystal-like formations that come from Ange expelling its energy across Lumios. These crystals can be found inside the Ultra Plant's dimension as well, now spread all over, with some even towering over their surroundings. Let's also talk about the names themselves. The most obvious one here is the Ultra Plant, which has the double meaning of power plants and, well, normal plants, something Xurkitry both exemplifies. But also take a look at the name Xurkitry and the way it's spelled. It's a combination of the words circuit and tree, or better said, it's a corruption of the two, as circuit isn't really spelled like that. It makes sense for this to be a corrupted word though, as the whole city seems to be undergoing a corruption of sorts, not just Hyper Rogue Ange. Listen to the music during the ending sequence of the game. The music plays itself forward before contorting and then playing itself backwards. And you know, we've had this concept used before. Specifically, it was used in a place called the Ultra Ruins, a dimension where Huali City lies in utter disarray, presumably due to a power plant exploding and then irradiating the entire area. And the Pokemon that resides here, it's known as Guzzlord, who, eerily enough, bears a striking resemblance to Zygarde, as if a similar mutation occurred to its own body. So if a mutation like this has occurred before, then the Ultra games weren't just a different dimension, but a glimpse into what would have happened to our Lumio City if we hadn't stopped Hyper Rogue Ange Floette.
Okay, before I move on with some quick fire theories about various Mega Pokemon, each of them having like little bite-sized theories, I gotta say, please go and subscribe to Amaze Dragon. He works so incredibly hard. He started this year. He's over 30,000 subscribers, growing fast. He's already had his first million-view video, which, by the way, 10 years, I've never had that, and he deserves it. The videos he's making are incredible, and if you like what I make here, if you like diving deep into the world of Pokemon lore and theories, which you clearly do because you're this far into a Pokemon lore Bible video by Lorekeeper Toby, you are going to like what he makes. So I'll leave him linked down below, check out his videos, and make sure to subscribe. Okay, let's do some quick fire Mega Evolution theories. So there's long been a theory that Garchomp and Sharpedo are related. After all, Gible is the land shark Pokemon. Both Pokemon have the rough skin ability, and they both have very similar designs. So perhaps Gible evolved to live on land after crawling out of the ocean. And of course, both Sharpedo and Garchomp got Mega Evolutions. There was one new thing that the Mega Evolution brought, though, that really tied this theory together. Mega Garchomp goes from being the shiny rubbish color the Garchomp normally is to a bright pink, matching that of Mega Sharpedo. In the animated series, there is an episode in which Misty is imagining like a powerful legendary water-type Pokemon. Misty has a weird connection to Gyarados in the series. It's one of the things he's most fearful of and ultimately becomes a tamer of and in control of, and in fact uses a Mega Gyarados when she reappears towards the end of Ash's journey. Oh, and here's the cool thing about that legendary water Pokemon that Misty was always chasing. Maybe it wasn't legendary at all. Maybe it was simply, well, look, Mega Gyarados. Mega Victreebel has just turned up on the scene, and I absolutely love this because I ended up doing a whole lore video about Bellsprout and the Bellsprout Tower. Why is there a tower to Bellsprout in the Johto region of all Pokemon? Obviously, its swaying body design is very, very helpful for learning how to build tall structures that might draw in the legendary bird Pokemon to roost, but it's more than that. Because Victreebel, it gives off a sweet scent from its body, like a honey. Honey, as we know in Generation 4, attracts Pokemon to the trees. And so on, the giant towers of Johto, built in the exact same way as the Sprout Tower, well, they would draw in only the biggest and best of bird Pokemon, especially if they were built off of Bellsprout. And a nod to this might be in Mega Victreebel's design, where for the first time we see Victreebel's leaves start to turn orange. They turn autumnal. It's a little bit of speculation, but I like this theory a lot, that perhaps the Ecruteak landscape and all those autumnal orange leaves are because of the Bellsprout DNA that is at the root of the towers on the north side of the city, the only place where those trees seem to grow. A viewer of mine said this to me years ago, and I absolutely love it. So, Carbink seems to be one of the oldest Pokemon in the entire history of the Pokemon world. Potentially, it is the oldest, being hundreds of millions of years old. It could possibly even predate Kabutops and Genesec's ancestor. But here's the thing. It's not just special in that sense. There's also a mythical Pokemon mutated from it, Diancie. We know this. This is just lore. This is fact. And people know about Diancie. I think there's someone in Anastar City that mentions the design of Diancie, and we can see a painting of Diancie, the girl with the diamond earring, in the Lumiose Museum. So Diancie is all well known about Pokemon. It's also the first discovered Kalos Pokemon to Mega Evolve, and I think there's a reason for that. I think Mega Evolution and the energy around Mega Evolution is fundamental to Diancie's way of life. According to its Pokedex entries, Diancie came about as a result of a spontaneous, sudden mutation of Carbink. Doesn't that sound a little bit like the evolution stones that Sycamore mentions being irradiated by the ultimate weapon, turning them into Mega Stones? And now we get Diancie, a Pokemon who looks like the gemstones of Mega Power that appear all through Pokemon Legends EA, and of course, the Anastar City Sundial. Again, a huge source of this Mega Power. But Diancie seems to be it living and breathing, or perhaps it is just simply the case that Carbink got in the way of the beam, or is stray to the beam. This could be in the same way that AZ's exposure to the weapon ultimately gave him incredible longevity, much like Lysander. Perhaps Diancie is one such stray victim of the ultimate weapon, except instead of being sad about its fate, it seems to just be the case that Diancie got the good end of the deal, being an irradiated Pokemon and with the ability to access Mega Evolution from within itself, becoming Mega Diancie. Okay, this one's a fun one. It's a classic one from Loxton, and it even actually creates a nice bridge with Gigantamax as well. Okay, it's very, very simple. Ghastly is the head of a gaseous being from another dimension making its way into this reality. Haunter then is the hands, having finally pushed through the barriers of the world, and Gengar is the whole body. Therefore, Mega Gengar is that Pokemon now rooting itself into this reality. It's a nice way of understanding them, but if you then include Gigantamax, well, Gigantamax Gengar is kind of like a doorway to the other reality, I suppose, ready to let in the spirits from beyond. If there's Pokedex entries that line up with that, they will have been on screen. If not, it's just a classic old Loxton theory that I really, really like, and I think totally works with Gigantamax as well. Another one from Lumi here. Palafin is a Mega Evolution. I know you're going to think, okay, now he's really just off on one, and I'm going to get to some serious ones in a moment. This is the last of the sort of quick fire round, but Palafin is a Pokemon that no one has ever actually seen evolve. Seriously, no, according to its Pokedex entries, Fenazin has evolved into Palafin, but no one has seen it. And look at what Palafin looks like when it's not in its hero mode. It's just the other Pokemon. Are we sure that it ever evolved between the two forms? Are we sure it's not the same form and that the evolution is happening somewhere off screen? In this form, it gains a massive visual change, but also a massive stat change as well. Zero to Hero is totally just Mega evolving. Not only that, but the Pokedex entry literally says that it calls upon Palafin's ancient DNA, reawakening it, which seems to tie in with a lot of the themes here. Another one from Lumi here. Palafin is a Mega Evolution. I know you're going to think, okay, now he's really just off on one, and I'm going to get to some serious ones in a moment. This is the last of the sort of quick fire round. But Palafin is a Pokemon that no one has ever actually seen evolve. Seriously, no, according to its Pokedex entries, Fenazin has evolved into Palafin, but no one has seen it. And look at what Palafin looks like when it's not in its hero mode. It's just the other Pokemon. Are we sure that it ever evolved between the two forms? Are we sure it's not the same form and that the evolution is happening somewhere off screen? In this form, it gains a massive visual change, but also a massive stat change as well. Zero to Hero is totally just Mega evolving. Not only that, but the Pokedex entry literally says that it calls upon Palafin's ancient DNA, reawakening it, which seems to tie in with a lot of the themes here. we now need to get a little bit more serious. This next one is maybe some of the darkest stuff that Pokemon has ever done. I think that Spiritomb is connected to Mega Evolution. And you might think, Spiritomb, the Generation 4 Pokemon, like what would that, which probably has its roots in Hisui, have to do with Mega Evolution at all? Well, Spiritomb is what happened when 108 angry spirits were bound to a fissure in an odd keystone. And you've been hearing me talk about Mega Evolution for the last hour, so you know that keystones are obviously a component of that phenomenon. However, it is important to note that in the original Japanese translation, these two items don't quite line up. A keystone can be any number of things. Still, it is interesting. Now, while we have a lot of lore about megastones, we actually have surprisingly little about keystones. We know that they're built into, like, the Mega Ring, for example. The Mega Ring being the thing that your trainer wears, produced by Quasartico in modern day. So there must be some way of mass producing it. And as we well know, that any technology that is developed using the life force of Pokemon is coined the term infinity energy. So it's channeling into this infinity energy. But where was this technology developed? Well, we should probably talk very quickly then about Route 108's Sea Marvel project. We know that the Hoenn region is subject to a lot of apocalyptic events. It's tormented by Groudon and Kyogre every 1,000 years. There's a meteorite shower that also passes around the same time, destroying places on the map. Meteor Falls, Sutopolis City was created literally because a meteorite created a hole in the ocean. If that had hit any major city, like the busiest city of all, Marvel City, it would have been a problem. So Watson, the gym leader, as well as Greater Marvel Holdings and the Devon Corporation all kind of work on various technologies, and there is some espionage involved between these two companies, Greater Marvel Holdings and Devon, to try and outpace each other, to work on technologies that will help protect the Pokemon world. We see this in the Delta episode. Devon have created a dimensional shifter called a link cable to literally throw meteorites into another dimension to another Hoenn. It's a solution, I suppose. Of course, the Draconids, the Lawkeepers, they hope that you'll work with Rayquaza to save the day. But what happens when a day comes and it cannot be saved? Well, that's what Greater Marvel Holdings was designed to deal with. They had two projects, the New Marvel and the Sea Marvel. The New Marvel is an apocalypse bunker. Over 40 floors underground, powered and allowing people to live. A whole city is meant to be able to exist here, safe from whatever happens above ground. The project was abandoned, and the reasons for that can be seen in the Sea Marvel. The Sea Marvel right now is like an abandoned ship. It's an abandoned oil rig. It's now become a little bit of an ecosystem for wild Pokemon, and trainers go there to battle. But across the floors, we can find papers that talk of the people that used to work here, Greater Marvel Holdings. They had a number of very strict and strange rules. I'm gonna have to do a whole video on this, I think, at some point. It kind of deserves its own video, but I haven't covered it in a while, so here they are. Number 1, say good morning very loudly. Number 2, don't bring your Pokemon to the workplace. Number 3, always arrive on time and always stay late. Number 4, lay your life on the line in the name of safety checks. Number 5, take joint responsibility for teamwork. Number 6, obey your superior's orders absolutely. Number 7, maintain top quality. Give up your sanity. Number 8, worship and praise the founder. Number 9, don't expect time off before you retire. And number 10, no need to think, just work unceasingly. It doesn't take a genius to work out that this is, it's not a good working environment. But the emphasis on safety checks, not asking questions and not bringing your Pokemon to work, obeying the founder and not really questioning anything, all of that ties into a very clear direction. The direction that Devon has been interested in, the direction the Greater Marvels are interested in, which is understanding how to use the life energy of living Pokemon, or maybe even people, and use it in technology. Watson found out what was going on and shut the whole thing down, which is why it's abandoned now. But there is one part of their research that is of particular interest, and this brings us back to Spiritomb. They obtained an odd keystone from the Orberg mine in the Sinnoh region. Why they would need such a device? Well, perhaps as a container for 108 angry spirits, 108 Pokemon, or possibly 108 employees, all funneled into one odd keystone. And how we're going to connect this very directly to Megastones and Mega Evolution? Well, if a Megastone is pulling from the DNA of a Pokemon that's been used on, or perhaps drawing out the ancient energy or life force of that Pokemon, then perhaps the keystone is a way of containing and, I guess, manipulating the life force of the trainer who is bonded to it. The odd keystone then is odd because it is both not bound to any other Pokemon, it's not linked to a Megastone, and it's not just bound to the energy of one person, I believe the Odd Keystone, Spiritomb, and it's, of course, Spiritomb existed in ancient times in Hisui. Back in those days, their ways of getting people's souls, angry spirit souls, into a keystone would have been far more magical, but I think the Odd Keystone and the Spiritomb of Sea Marvel is the result of experimentations on infinity energy, on the science of Pokemon life force and people life force to create new and dark technologies. Okay, now for something a little bit more lighthearted, and this one's actually a recent one. I saw this one on TyranitarTube's channel. He was just like spitballing, and I thought, this is a good theory. I like this a lot. So, here we go. In the post-game of Pokemon Legends EA, you can catch Xerneas and Yveltal, but your way that you have to go about catching them is a little bit different. With Yveltal, you battle simulations of rogue mega Pokemon, because the presence of Yveltal coming to the city doesn't do anything to the city until Yveltal shows up, at which point it's a threat because it can absorb the life force of the people of the city, which, by the way, sorry, I said I'd do something lighthearted, but this is equally dark. Speaking of which, there's a Litwick side quest in which the Litwick, literally, according to its Pokédex entry, likes to drain the life force of things, and is doing so. There's a little girl who's just like, I'm cool for Litwick to drain my life force, so it's a real threat. So what does Xerneas do when it shows up? Well, Xerneas instead is, of course, the giver of life energy. It bestows and nourishes the world with its life power. And what we see in its presence are some rogue alpha Pokemon, these far more aggressive Pokemon that seem to be like, I guess like in many of the ways we've spoken about in this video, overstimulated by the amount of energy in it. And Quasartico believe that if these alpha Pokemon and if Xerneas is allowed to go unchecked, more new rogue megas will show up. Which I think what TyranitarTube illustrates is so wonderfully here is that really Mega Evolution is more Xerneas' thing than Yveltal's thing. Take a Pokemon, give it a Xerneas, you get a Mega Evolution. Give it an Yveltal, you get a dead, because it's the absence of life force. But here's what I love about this, and this is kind of my addition here. It kind of explains the two of AZ's creation, the Ultimate Weapon and Anj. The Ultimate Weapon is fueled by Yveltal. Primarily, it's fueled by Yveltal. In the post-game, in the Quasartico building, it's mentioned that Malva captured Yveltal for their plans at the time. We know through the events of the game that Lysander's goal was to actually activate both devices. One, of course, is ultimately to destroy, and that's what he tried to do, to fire the ultimate weapon to get rid of all life that was not Team Flare, not someone he deemed worthy of surviving. But the other device, well, the other device then, the red and blue button, Yveltal and Xerneas, and the device that he gave up on, and the one that is swelling with mega power right now in this game in ZA, is the one ultimately powered by Xerneas. Because I think what Lysander's goal was then to use that device to give immortality to the people that were left around, everyone who is part of Team Flare, to bestow himself with that eternal energy. But they couldn't find out a way to activate that machine, so they just focused on the former. Yveltal is the Pokemon of the Ultimate Weapon, Xerneas is the Pokemon of Anj, Yveltal is the Pokemon of Destruction, and Yveltal the Pokemon of Life, and as a result, that overwhelming life energy becomes Mega Evolution. The misfiring of the Ultimate Weapon all that time ago causes Anj to awaken. Because Xerneas and Yveltal are primordial forces that should not be messed with, the balance of life and death, it's not something to be toyed with, and so that's why ultimately the events of ZA happen within such a short time frame of X and Y. Okay, moving on, more Mega Evolution theories. Okay, so before we get onto some smaller stakes theories here, let's just talk about like one of the biggest theories that there is. That Mega Evolution is ultimately but one expression of the energy that we see in every upcoming Pokemon game. It just keeps on coming out. I'm talking about Terastal, I'm talking about Gigantamax, I'm talking about Z-moves. There is so much evidence for this, and if you've watched my old deep dive on Zygarde, and then of course on the Arceus theory, you can kind of see it all play out there. But just to recap the fundamentals. Z-moves, like Mega Stones, resonate when a trainer has a bond with their Pokemon to awaken something within them to do something more powerful. Zygarde actually goes to Alola in between Pokemon X and Y and Pokemon ZA and learns a brand new move. His main move, Core Enforcer, which is a giant Z, not just because he's Zygarde, because he's practicing Z moves, a move connected to light. Necrozma's light as well is also what creates the Ultra Wormholes, and the Ultra Wormholes irradiate the local Pokemon of Alola to become Totem Pokemon. Totem Pokemon are larger than their regular counterparts and a whole lot stronger, kind of like Alphas and kind of like Mega Evolution. On top of that, alpha Pokemon, that connects to the days of Hisui, and the big Hisui and alpha Pokemon, well, those would be the noble Pokemon, the ones bathed in Arceus's light. Arceus's light, of course, is the life essence of all Pokemon, so you can see another connection there. Then, of course, we have Gigantamax. How is Gigantamax connected? Well, when Gigantamax energy is present at a power spot, a trainer with a certain band that comes from a meteorite that connects to the body of the local legendary deity allows that Pokemon to change shape and become more powerful. On top of that, the idea of a Pokemon's energy naturally being tied to growing and shrinking is actually kind of fundamental to the science of them. He might have been wrong because it was 150 years ago, but Lavington says that Pokeballs are designed around a Pokemon's ability to automatically shrink and change its own size. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever seen the beam of a max raid den, looks an awful lot like the red beam that comes out of a Pokeball to shrink that Pokemon. And we know that Pokeballs work off the same technology, at least modern Pokeballs do, because they were developed, at least in large part, by the Pokeball factory in Kalos and the Devon Corporation, who uses infinity energy in their technologies. The life energy of Pokemon is kind of like the Pokemon's magic. Like, I think that Pokemon are biological creatures, but it kind of is the magic part of them. It is what makes a Pokemon not an animal. And people, too, in the Pokemon world also have access. They can tap into this. In the Paldea region, once again, the Terrestrial phenomenon comes from a local legendary deity. And it's through Crystal Dens and the Terra Orb, a recently developed technology that looks like a Pokeball, but also has the element to do with this specific mechanic inside it. Well, it's these Pokeballs that can once again change the way a Pokemon looks, because they do, even if they all look the same, you know, depending on the type it's focusing on. And in some cases, like Terrapagos and Ogerpon, it changes their form once again. That same energy that exists in Area Zero that comes from this crystal seeps into the ground and becomes the Herba Mystica. And the Herba Mystica gets eaten by the Titan Pokemon, making them grow giant, stronger variants of themselves. What's more likely? That all of these powers, all of them channel and funnel into the same thing. That there is one overarching theory that ties all this stuff together, likely coming from the Arceus. And again, I gotta recommend you watch my video on the Arceus. It goes into even more granular detail. Or that Pokemon just doesn't know how to tell anything more than just one kind of story, which, hey, you know, we remain in hope. All of this, of course, tying back to Lucario as the first Mega Evolution, or the first one that was discovered by people, because it is the one most in tune with the life aura, the life waves of people and living beings. So it would make sense that it would be the one that would most easily be able to access this transformation. They're all just different versions of the exact same thing. Okay, so there is some debate, and I mentioned it in this video, as to whether Mega Pokemon are like artificially created or not. And to be honest, it can go either way. I think there are some that do happen organically. For example, we literally see it in Pokemon Legends ZA. Rogue Mega Pokemon appear. No one creates the stones that you get from them, and they're not just like a game mechanic. At the same time, I do think there is some kind of way of reverse engineering, because it is about DNA splicing, and Quasartico seems to potentially know the secrets. You can give them Mega Shards, and they will in return give back to you Mega Stones of newly discovered Mega Pokemon. So there is a technology that's working on developing these. In particular, I think there is interest around Mega Mewtwo X and Charizard X. These X versions of the Pokemon, they look like the letter X. No, they don't. No, they don't. The XY thing, where they all look like X's and look like Y's. No, they don't. These versions seem a little bit more inorganic than their Y counterparts. Of course, when it comes to Raichu, it's hard to say. One's more Pikachu-like and one's more Raichu-like, and they're both very Gorochu-like. Here's what I will say. With Mewtwo specifically, I think there's a good chance that its Mega Stones, or at least the Mega Stone for X, is artificially created. I mentioned earlier in the Pokemon Origins special that we see the Mega Charizard Knight X given to Red, and then Red uses that to take on Mewtwo. It's given to him by Fuji, and Fuji, even in this canon, did work for Team Rocket. And if you extend that to the old movie and everything else we know about Fuji, possibly he's the guy who engineered Mewtwo. Why would he have this Mega Stone? Well, Fuji and Blaine are probably pretty closely related. The Cinnabar Gym, Mansion, and Lab are all on, well, Cinnabar Island, where this research was likely being conducted. We see Mew's tanks in the Cinnabar Mansion, and then, of course, when you come to the Cinnabar Lab, you see someone on the wall. Is it Blaine or is it Fuji? They're commented as looking alike. and Blaine is a master of fire Pokemon, so perhaps experimentations on Blaine's Charizard allowed Fuji to understand how you can artificially create a Mega Evolution, something he would apply to Mewtwo retrospectively, and so that is why we get Mega Mewtwo X, a Pokemon with a second Mega, because that one is artificial, made by science, the same way that Quasartico do it now. Of course, speaking of Mewtwo, I also mentioned earlier that the first time Mewtwo showed up, it was Mega Evolved at its own pace. This is to do with a very classic theory of mine that I absolutely love. Mewtwo's part human. It doesn't need a strong bond with a human trainer because it is its own human trainer. Mewtwo in the manga gets its DNA from Blaine. Again, here showing up, he's all there. See, they're all in on it. Mewtwo is different to every other Pokemon in that it is able to contemplate its existence in a more human-like way, into something we recognize as more philosophical. That's not to say that Pokemon otherwise don't do that, just that it seems more human in the way that it behaves. And when it comes to Mewtwo, we usually see it at 2 points in its story. Usually straight after creation, in which case it's a kind of rampaging, monstrous version of itself. It is interesting to note that Giovanni, depending on what version you play, Ultra Sun or Ultra Moon, does use a Mega Mewtwo X or Y, suggesting that he has access to, obviously, both of those stones. And Mewtwo seems to be being created by Team Rocket for the sole purpose of destruction. But later in its story, Mewtwo acts as more of a guardian to weaker Pokemon, protecting the clones of its clone island in the Mewtwo Returns movie, protecting the Pokemon of the kind of, I think it's like a sacred forest that we see in the Journeys episode. In Pokemon X and Y, it's hiding out in a cave in the Pokemon Village, a village for lost and abandoned Pokemon. In the Genesect movie, it really wants to help Genesect, Pokemon that have been brought back from thousands of years ago, unsure what to do about their own existence. It wants to be like a teacher to them. It wants to care for them. This is a Pokemon at peace with its own existence, literally bonded with itself. And so this is how you end up with a Pokemon able to Mega Evolve itself at will with no strain. Not like, again, the rogue Mega Evolutions who are just being flooded with rogue Mega Evolution energy that we see in ZA. I think that's a nice point to segue into the next theory, which is why Mega Evolutions are good. There are so many Pokédex entries and, examples of rogue Mega Pokemon where clearly the strain on their bodies is more than they're expecting. It might be the case that the reason a Pokemon needs a trainer, a human trainer with a strong bond, isn't just so that the Pokemon can, Mega Evolve safely, but so that it has somebody else to help share the strain of Mega Evolution with. That's what the trainer does, bonding into them with their keystone. It resonates, their spirits align. I think we kind of see this with the Ash Greninja in the anime, and I want to say we see it with Mega Evolutions throughout the anime, but I'm not sure about that. Regardless, what Mega Evolution does explain is why catching Pokemon is a good thing. When Pokemon exist in the wild, they don't often evolve because they don't gain experience to do so. It's very rare to find evolved Pokemon in the wild. You always find lower level and weaker Pokemon. Working side by side with a trainer is not only the way for most Pokemon to be able to evolve, but it is the only way for a Pokemon to be able to safely Mega Evolve. And being able to safely Mega Evolve and achieve the strength of that power level is the thing that brings it closest to other legendary Pokemon. Maybe local deities, maybe it just makes it feel good to be bathed in that much power. Maybe it connects it closer to Arceus. Again, there are links to the same kinds of energy. For whatever the case, it seems that Pokemon seek out and want to be able to Mega Evolve. In the first anime episode, there is this bit where the Pokedex says that wild Pokemon are jealous of human-trained Pokemon. And people have always wondered if catching Pokemon is a bad thing, and I don't think it is. I think that the descriptions of Mega Evolution that are painful are talking specifically about rogue Megas. Pokemon like those in the Beginner movie that are being forced to Mega Evolve not in the proper way, not by sharing the burden with a trainer they are bonded with. So instead what we end up witnessing is, painful transformations. But generally speaking, Mega Evolution is the goal. It might be the ultimate and final goal of all Pokemon, to ascend themselves and become something more powerful, something they can only do when they work alongside a human trainer. And that actually might necessitate a Pokeball, by the way. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, we see that the Pokeballs are coded to certain trainers. I think it's even locked to their DNA, if I'm not mistaken. Might be remembering that wrong. But either way, when a Pokeball is in a person's hand, the person and the Pokemon are bonded. The Pokeball is more than just a capture device, it's a conduit between the two. It's a way of sharing energy. And I think the Mega Ring and the Mega Stones and Mega Evolution is all doing the exact same thing, making the trainer and the Pokemon as one. If we were to see this in its ultimate form, then I guess that's kind of what the Ash Greninja is. Not Mega Greninja, but something even further beyond that. Something that we've very rarely seen. We now get Mega Starmie, and it looks a lot more humanoid, just like another space psychic type Pokemon that it's said to be connected to, Deoxys, a humanoid space virus that is powered by a gem core in its center. We learned that from the Pokedex entries of Mega Starmie, it's trying to look more humanoid, but perhaps it's trying to look actually more like a Pokemon that pulls from its own ancestral DNA. There are many theories out there that connect Starmie to Deoxys. They're both psychic-type Pokemon from space, and it is said that Starmie beams a light into the night sky from under the ocean, as if it was some kind of advanced foot soldier. And speaking of feet and limbs of all kinds, Starfish are able to regrow them, just like Starmie is, and just like Deoxys can. So perhaps these Pokemon are connected in some big Pokemon alien invasion theory. Okay, quick thought, we're going right back to the beginning of the video now. We're talking about evolution, like regular evolution. If Megastones really can be produced from irradiated evolution stones, then what are evolution stones? Ovi did a theory years ago about not just evolution stones, but also the Everstone, which I think this is so fascinating. We see that when a Pokemon wants to evolve, what it can do, and we see this in Whirlipede's Pokedex entry, and I think a number of the other bug Pokemon, is they create shells to store energy. They're storing energy, waiting for evolution to happen. In that sense, I think what the evolution stones do is they allow access to unlock that energy, that stored energy, or perhaps they just have that energy within them. Everstones then perhaps act as a store for that energy that cannot like signal it out. It cannot like give after it's received. And so any experience a Pokemon's gained, it can gain, but it won't ever evolve because the evolution part of that energy locked away, stored behind the Everstone. But what's really interesting, and this came up in Pokemon Legends ZA, is there's a side quest about a Frostlass. This Frostlass makes you follow it around the city, and once you do, and you're overlooking the wild area, the ice wild area where the Snorunt live, it will just disappear into the ether, leaving behind a Dornstone, the evolution stone that you need to evolve a Snorunt into a Frostlass. And a text box comes up suggesting that this was what Frostlass's sort of unfinished business was. This is what it needed to do to be able to pass on. Maybe this is part of the life cycle of a Pokemon, that when it dies, it channels its own life force into a crystallized stone. Much like how fossils, which you often find in the same stone emporiums or in the same like cave areas that you find these evolution stones, or in like the Sinnoh Underground, for example, perhaps much like fossils are rocks that contain enough of the Pokemon that with the right activation key, you can then access and turn into a Pokemon. Perhaps that's what evolution stones are, containing the DNA, containing the fuel for the specific Pokemon that needs it to evolve. Of course, multiple evolution stones work on multiple Pokemon, so perhaps it can act as a gateway for multiple different species of Pokemon. I can imagine, though, that Frostlass would be pretty annoyed if I used the Dawnstone on a Curlier to get a Gallade. I think that might be a little bit over the line. I'm going to do it anyway, because I think it'd be funny. But it goes to show, no matter how different the species of Pokemon look, they're all rooted from the same place, the same sort of life energy. And I'm sure we'll learn much more as new evolution methods get discovered. Even new evolution methods for the same Pokemon, like Feebas, for example, that can evolve a number of different ways into the exact same form. As new evolution methods get discovered, we'll learn a lot more, and maybe I'll have to do a full video on evolution then. Okay, so I have two theories about Mega Evolution left, but then there's actually another one which is over on Amaze Dragon's channel right now. So the first one is one that actually came up while I was talking with him, and I think it's really interesting. It's just a brief one. While Rayquaza Mega evolved for the first time 1,000 years ago at the Sky Pillar, it's thought to be that is the original Mega Evolution, like that's what Rumor on the Street is in Lumio City. It seems likely that predated the Lucario Mega Evolution. But then again, maybe not. Is it possible that the Tower of Mastery is 2,000 years old? The same age as Ange, the tower at the heart of Lumio City. Because that very tower can only really be used when Mega Floette is used by the most powerful Mega Evolution user in the control room. Now, it's possible that the control room was adapted and changed over time. Like, very possible. In fact, it might be the case that the reason it was a Pokemon gym in Pokemon X and Y was, unbeknownst to Clement and Bonnie, they were hoping powerful trainers would go to the gym to try and find the most powerful Mega Evolution user. But here's the thing. If the tower was designed with Mega Floette in mind, that means that Mega Evolution and Mega Floette were known about 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years after the firing of the ultimate weapon, and 1,000 years before Rayquaza Mega evolved at the Sky Pillar. Now, this wouldn't be crazy weird, given that it is just, again, another transformation of the same kind of energy that dates back since the beginning of the Pokemon universe. But what I find really, really interesting here is it might place a date for the creation of the Tower of Mastery being at least 2,000 years ago. The same time the Draconid's home was destroyed by meteorites, those same meteorites crashing down also in the Kalos region, being those first Megastones that were found and became Mega Lucario. Meaning that, yeah, actually Mega Lucario really is the first Mega Evolution. Maybe it was even AZ and AZ's Lucario, making a nice full circle to the story of AZ when, after he passes, you get Karina's Lucario given to you from him. There's one more mythical Pokemon we need to talk about that's tied to Mega Evolution, and you might think, is it Volcanion, is it Hoopa? No, it's actually the Alolan Mega Pokemon, Magearna. Magearna, while Alolan, doesn't really feel connected to the Alola region that much. It is, and there's lore there, and maybe I'll cover that one day, but actually it was first introduced as part of the XYZ anime in the Volcanion movie, in the Kingdom of Azoth. Azoth, of course, being a very important word to do with the name AZ, the beginning and the end. And inside Magearna is this thing, this technology, this device of mystery science, and it's called the Soul Heart. The Soul Heart is blue on one side, red on the other. Blastoise and Charizard, maybe, but probably more likely Xerneas and Yveltal, because this Soul Heart is the source of Magearna's life energy. The design of the Pokeball around it, which is 500 years old, by the way, probably the oldest depiction of the modern Pokeball, what the modern Pokeball is based off of, and how they learned to make modern Pokeballs based off of using the life energy of Pokemon. It was probably based off of Magearna, a Pokemon that, yeah, at its core has this soul heart, this bit of life force. But what I think is really interesting here, this is an old hybrid hero theory, I think this is great, is that Magearna may be a human attempt at using life energy to recreate Diancie, a very valuable Pokemon, right, that can create diamonds. Diancie and Magearna, look at them side by side, both very feminine Pokemon. They've got like these big, well, I guess Magearna has the big ears, whereas Diancie has the long diamond ear things, both wearing dresses, both fairy types, both mythical Pokemon, almost back to back in the Pokedex, and both with just this very interesting tie to the life energy of Pokemon. Any kingdom that could possess something like a Diancie that can just create these stones that, by the way, I think it's called the Soul Heart, is the big diamond that Diancie creates in the Xerneas movie. Any region that has control over something like that has control over Mega Evolution, which is what the villain of that film is trying to use to assert his power, will be the most powerful kingdom in the history of the world. So trying to create something like Diancie and ending up with Magearna as a result makes a lot of sense. Of course, we have one more original Mega Evolution theory by a Maze Dragon, and to find out about it, you'll have to subscribe to this channel, and then